she's just a psychopath. Like his wife, played by
Yeah,
Laura
yeah.
Linney,
So she,
just a
so
just a
she.
psychopath.
Hey guys, my name is Alain.
And I'm David, and welcome to our podcast, I Finally Watched, where we talk about movies that at least one of us hasn't seen before.
We discuss our thoughts on the film and determine, was it worth the wait?
Does it still hold up, and would we watch it again?
And for this episode, I finally watched Mystic River.
So, Alain, what did you think of Mystic River?
This kept getting recommended to me, and I just never really, I don't know. I read the synopsis. All it says is tragedy reunites childhood friends Sean, Dave, and Jimmy, who are linked together in a murder investigation. And from there, that's all I know about the movie. So going into it and watching it last night, I really liked it. I'm not going to say I was blown away. I'm not going to say it's something I've never seen this before. Probably due to the fact that it is 17 years old.
Right.
But I really thought it was a solid movie.
So when I saw this, 2003, I was about 16. And so at that point, having a car and just having an excuse to go places, I would go to the movies a good bit by myself. And I don't know what led me to see this movie because I don't remember knowing anything about it going into it. But I saw it, and at the time I was blown away by it. And within a week, I talked to one of my friends into going and seeing it again.
You liked it that much?
Yes. And I wasn't even sure if he would like it because he doesn't have great taste in movies. But he was blown away by it too. At least that's what he told me. Which I don't know if that's a good sign for it being a good movie, but I think it is. Yeah, I was blown away by it. And then when I watched it earlier for purposes of this, I still had kind of the same feeling. Like I noticed a lot more things that I probably missed back then. The buildup of this movie still had me, for the last 20, 30 minutes, I was kind of standing in front of my TV just so I could take it all in, and still had the same anxiety watching it. So
that anxiety in the last 30 minutes really got me too. I was standing. I think I ended up at one point behind my couch watching it from a distance because I will say it is a good movie. It's probably a better movie back in 2003 than it is here now in 2020. I noticed a lot of tropes. So I know that we can't get much into the movie spoiler free because I feel like right off the bat, except for maybe the first 20 minutes, it's plot point after plot point after plot point. So,
well, you could consider, I think you might even consider the first 5 minutes of a spoiler, the setup of it. When I went into it, I don't think that I knew anything about it. I kind of wish I'd rewatched a trailer for it before this just to see what would have drawn me into it. But yeah, I think there's a big plot line in the first few minutes, and then I think 30 to 45 minutes in, there's another huge point that I think it changes. Still a great movie if you know about that going in, but I think it makes it so much better if you don't.
Well, I think one of the lures of this movie, especially back then, is who stars in it. Sean Penn, Kevin Bacon, Tim Robbins, Lawrence Fishburne. Those are all great actors. Those are actors that I enjoy watching. So, especially back in 2003, I can see the appeal of watching something with this like star-studded cast. The kids in the beginning of the film who grow up to be the adults are, let me see if I can get, Jimmy is played by Sean Penn. Sean is played by Kevin Bacon, and Dave is played by Tim Robbins.
Would have made it so much easier if Sean Penn just was named Sean.
So here's the thing, though, is that the kids that they got to play the younger versions of these actors, I feel like the kid they got to play young Jimmy should have grown up to look more like Kevin Bacon. I didn't think that the casting on the kids was very well done. Jimmy should have been Sean. Dave is fine. I just really think those two should have been switched, because for those who haven't seen it, young Jimmy, who is Sean Penn, is played by this like extremely pale, freckled redhead kid. And I can't imagine him growing up to looking anything like Sean Penn.
Well, if you notice too at the end of the movie, and this doesn't spoil anything, but you see Sean Penn with his shirt off, and he has this cross on his back with what I think looks like a 4-leaf clover. So I think he's supposed to be Irish, I would guess.
Well, he's kind of like in the Irish mob, right? He's kind of like that kind of guy. Yeah, because he has a few prison tattoos and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure some of those are just Sean Penn tattoos. But
they probably had to cover up some of his.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it kind of threw me off a little bit in the beginning, because I really felt like the kid who played Jimmy would have grown up to more look like Kevin Bacon, and then vice versa with the kid who looked like Sean. But that's
also, they're in the movie for like maybe 2 minutes, so it doesn't really matter that much.
That's the only thing that I felt was off.
Well, and I think at this point it's probably a good time just to get into the movie, kind of starting with the beginning. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, I would go watch it. So I think the thing that struck me first, I don't know if you picked up on this, but, and just to lay out the plot a little further. So the 3 boys, Sean, Jimmy, and Dave, are playing outside, and at a certain point they decide to write their names in cement, and 2 guys pull up in a car, and one of them seems to be a police officer and tells them, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this. Where do you live?" And because Dave doesn't live there, is what he says. He's like, the would-be police officer tells him, "I'm gonna drive you to your mom's house," and then takes him off. And he's held captive for 4 days, and presumably is molested during that time. Which that part is just so. Even watching it again for this, it's just, you're like, don't get in that car. Like, it's just one of those tense moments where something's wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, not even then, but there's towards the end of the movie, Dave gets in a car again as an adult, and you're thinking the exact same thing. You're thinking, kid, man, don't get in that car.
Yeah, it was one of those like, hey, look at this moment. Look what we did with our movie where we showed this twice, that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. But so after that point, it comes to the present day. Kevin Bacon, who plays Sean, is a Massachusetts State police officer. He's a homicide detective. And Jimmy, played by Sean Penn, is just shown running a convenience store. And his daughter works there. And then you meet his daughter's boyfriend, who Jimmy doesn't like, and then that sets up the story. Eventually, you find out that Jimmy's daughter was murdered. One thing I noticed that was interesting to me, and I think really like sets the movie. There's almost no music. There's no score up until you find her body. Like I kept noticing there's just a silence, and like it just. I don't know if I would have noticed it the first time, but I think it just really builds the dread of like expecting what's happening, because it's just sort of building and building where, oh, she's missing. She didn't come home. Oh, she'll turn up. Oh, she's not at her friend's house. Oh, she's going to come to church for her sister's first communion. Oh, she's not there. And then you see the cop cars go by, and then Jimmy starts to figure out something's wrong. And then when you find the body, that's when the score kicks in. I think it's just like really impactful.
Yeah, I didn't notice that, but now thinking back on it, yeah, I can see that. The dread and the anxiety that leads to them finding her body. many ways, I feel like the film is very predictable.
I was gonna
And
ask you about that. Not to interrupt, but real quick, did you think she was gonna be dead? Like, were you for
I
sure when
thought
she
it
was?
was so well, I thought it was so obvious that she was gonna be found dead, that she wasn't gonna be found dead. Um, and that comes kind of that obvious play. I know you know what I'm talking about. Comes on later in that movie, um, with who murdered her. And I have to tell you, there's one scene kind of in the middle of the movie that I figured out the whole thing. And I don't know if it's because, like, would I have figured it out if I was like you, 16, back in 2003, haven't seen as many movies as I've seen now, hasn't seen as many tropes, and then, kind of fell for what the movie was feeding you. It's kind of back when what I said about in Ex Machina, where the movie manipulates you with music and situational stuff, that it kind of wants you to think one thing until it doesn't.
What scene are you talking about?
When they sit down to interrogate Brendan Harris, Katie's boyfriend,
Right.
and they're in his living room or dining room, and they're interviewing him. They're interrogating him, being like, where were you between blah 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 time and this time, and can you have a alibi? In the middle of that, his brother walks in with his friend carrying a hockey stick and skateboards, and I turn to my girlfriend and she looks at me, and I go, I figured it out. And she read my mind, she thought the same thing. And so we finished the rest of the movie. And then as it got towards the end, it became more and more obvious. And so I think that's like, this is like a 2 hour, 5-minute movie. And that scene takes place about an hour in. And when the movie ended, we were like pretty proud of ourselves that we felt like we figured it out about halfway in the movie.
Well, and the movie does kind of play out like a almost like a Law and Order episode where they leave clue after clue after clue that get kind of more obvious. Like if you uh, if you look at like the way that he's carrying the hockey stick in the store.
I don't know if you can see on my notes, but I literally have on like the second line, except for the beginning and the very end, it's very Law and Order.
Thanks for showing me your screen.
I was thinking well, I needed proof because I was thinking the exact same thing.
So yeah, and so it plays out very procedurally, but I think there's also just so much like subtext in the movie, like other little stories going on that are like super interesting that you don't find in a Law and Order movie or
Well,
Law and Order show.
Yeah, I agree. As far as the story goes and the writing goes, there's a lot of it got to a point that it was so obvious Law and Order, and I had to look it up. I was like, did Law and Order rip this, or did it obviously rip from Law and Order? Just like the tracking walking scenes where they're like interrogating someone to like, oh, we should check out the manager over at McGill's, and then cut to them talking to the manager at McGill's. That kind of very
Yeah.
basic process of Law and Order.
Yeah, but I also think it's hard to do a homicide detective type movie without looking like Law and Order.
But I mean, so in the end, they cut between these very two different situations, and I felt like that wasn't like Law and Order at all. But when it really stuck with the detectives, and they were like, "Oh, let's check out this guy," or "Oh, let's go and interrogate this guy," and it cut to them doing that. At one point in the movie, I just kept going, "Dun dun," after every scene because it just felt so basic in that way. But I think beyond that, where the movie really shines in the writing is, like you were saying, the little stuff, the backstory of how everyone has a little something extra.
Well, and I think the main way you can see that is the building up of Sean Penn's character, because he starts out, he's this convenience store owner, and then as he comes to the crime scene of what he finds out to be his daughter's death, he's got these guys with him, and he's kind of giving them orders, and you're like, oh, these are friends or whatever, and I guess he's just a smart dude. He's kind of telling them what they need to do, and it's a Boston neighborhood, so they like to handle things on their own. But then you find out, oh, he's been in prison for a robbery. But just like the way he communicates with his guys too, he's like, all right, you go over there. I'm like, you handle this. I'm like, all right, I got it. I just find it like the way they built him into this. Basically, at the end, he's like a friggin' mafia boss.
In the end, he basically confesses to a murder we'll get to in a second to lead detective Kevin Bacon. And he doesn't...
Who confesses?
Sean Penn's character.
Oh, right.
Jimmy confesses to the murder of Dave, who, for the record, the movie really, really wanted you to think Dave did it. Dave is the friend who was molested and got abducted when they were children. And, he screwed up in the head because of it. And he has all these, like, his story doesn't stand straight when he gives it. He gives a different story on where he was that night 3 different times, and it was 3 different stories. No, he can't keep to the same story. His wife is becoming suspicious of him. The music gets real weird, and the lighting gets real weird when he acts, out of, real weird. And the movie really, really likes him for it, and they want you to really think he did it, which for me really made me look at every other possibility besides him, just because I was already in the mind frame that this is too obvious. There has to be another suspicious character.
Which is why watching this 17 years after it's released might, it might have been better to watch it then, because you would have less of these, less of this history of shows you've watched that have like, oh, this is who you should be looking at, but then it turns out to be a different guy. Well, one thing I really liked in all that, when they were trying to paint Dave as the murderer, is the interrogation. And I think I had seen this scene in other places too, like just repeated over as like a seminal scene in the movie, where they got his car, and there's his blood in the front seat, and then there's a different type of blood in the trunk. And they got his car because they said it was stolen. And so they're asking, Lawrence Fishburne's asking him like, oh, how'd you get blood in the front seat? He's like, well, it's, I cut myself doing this, and then I got it everywhere, and I tried to clean it up. And he's like, well, what's your blood type? And he tells him, he's like, oh, well, that matches that. He's like, well, great. That's what I told you. He's like, and then Lawrence Fishburne's like, well, what about the blood in the trunk? He's like, well, how would I know about that? You're the one that just told me my car was stolen. Maybe you should find out who stole it. And it's just like, and Kevin Bacon even says, he's like, he just handed us our asses. Like, what do you want us to do with it? Like,
it's one moment in the film where you kind of underestimate Dave as the audience, and also the detectives. I feel like he's very underestimated, but he's very smart.
He just seems like damaged goods throughout the entire movie. After the incident of, he says at the end of the movie, he's like, I never even had a childhood. He's like, he tells Sean Penn, like, what if it had been you in that car? With Sean Penn's like, well, it wasn't. It was you. And he just...
What was heartbreaking to me is at the end of the movie, I think it was Kevin Bacon's character who was like, it could have been any one of us in that car, and sometimes it feels like all of us walked into that car, because the events that happened, the ripple effects and the events that happened affected all of them. And we can really see that at the very last shot during the parade, which I definitely want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It affects not only them, but it affected their children. and it affected their wives. And it just, it really is. It's one of them got in that car, but it might as well have been all of them.
Well, and then the other thing too, we talked about the Dave getting in the car twice, and it's like the first time he gets in the car, it's like killing his humanity, basically. Like he'll never lead the same life, and then when he gets in the car the second time, it's just actually killing him and ending his life. It's just that decision to get in, which honestly, you don't know if either time he really even had a decision. It kind of sort of it happened to him. Like, he was a kid, so it was that unless he ran away, those guys probably would have just grabbed him and thrown him in the back. And when the Savage brothers come up and tell him, "Oh, let's go eat," he doesn't really seem. I don't think he has a choice there either, unless he's able to run and like get away. So it's just that shot of like him basically he dies twice when that happens.
When you kind of get over the fact that he didn't do this, it was some other kid, you start feeling really bad for him. I know I did. I feel just like my heart like really, really went out to the guy. Like, his childhood was stolen from him, and then he's wanted for this crime he didn't commit.
And then he's never gonna see his boy. Like he's taken, Sean Penn takes Dave away from his son. Just ruins that family.
Well, you can really see it in the aftermath on Dave's kid's face that he is now also damaged goods.
Yeah, he will be. What I also think too is was interesting about that is Sean Penn and his wife sort of blame everyone but Sean Penn. Jimmy tries to, he's, talking to himself and he's like, "Oh, I killed him and I can't take it back." And his wife's like, "The reason, I told my daughters that the reason we're safe is because you'll do whatever it takes." Basically, like, even if you kill the wrong people, you're going to kill people to make us safe. Like in that moment, and then there's another moment, but in that moment, I was like, she's just a psychopath. Like his wife, played by Laura Linney.
So she's
a psychopath.
Yeah. So she basically has no character in the entire film. Nothing. And then in the last 10 minutes, she throws this whole freaking dialogue thing at you. And you're like,
him a king.
What the hell is she thinking? And okay, so I do want to talk about the last 10 minutes in quite a bit of detail, because it is literally, I timed it on my second watch, the last 10 minutes of the movie. Before the last 10 minutes of the movie, Sean Penn's character, Jimmy, kills Tim Robbins' character, Dave.
Yeah, he basically tells him to confess and I'll let you live. And then once he gives a false confession just so he can live, Sean Penn kills him.
And throws him into the Mystic River, which for the longest time, I was like, why the hell is this movie called The Mystic River? And then you find out in the end. Or maybe that's me knowing nothing about Massachusetts. Maybe everyone knows that river is called Mystic River. Who knows?
Just people in Boston.
Yeah, just people in Boston. But the ending, that you find out that it was Brendan Harris's brother who was mute. He killed Jimmy's daughter along with his friend. Sorry, that's confusing.
Brendan Harris's brother.
With the help of his friend, he killed Jimmy's daughter. And they catch him, they arrest him, but at the same time that this is happening, Jimmy is convinced Dave killed his daughter and murders him. When Kevin Bacon tells Jimmy that, we caught the kids, it was Ray Harris's youngest son, and he confessed with beyond a reasonable doubt.
And then he blames Sean for it. He blames Kevin Bacon. He says, "Well, maybe if you'd caught him faster." And then you see the realization on Sean's face, like, oh, you killed him. Like, I can't believe it.
I call it the perfect ending because they come to the resolution that, they caught who did it. Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn, they kind of have a heart-to-heart face-off sort of thing. They imagine Dave driving away in the car like that happened in the beginning. Sean just walks down the street with a bottle of Jack in his hand, and I'm like, okay, it's not a perfect ending, but that's the ending. And then the last 10 minutes of the movie.
Well, I think and I agree. The last 10 minutes are amazing because there's, before all this, the reason Jimmy decides to kill Dave is because Dave's wife says, yes, I think he did it. Without that, I don't think Jimmy kills him.
No, definitely. And Celeste, Dave's wife, has absolutely no faith in her husband at all.
And then so when Jimmy is sort of having this crisis of conscience, like, oh, I killed this guy, I can't take it back. And Laura Linney is, who I think her name's Annabeth in the movie, says, this isn't your fault. I need, your daughters love you and we want someone that's going to protect us. And then she's also like, and who would say that thing about their husband? Like, what is wrong with Celeste? And then at the end, in the 10 minutes that you want to talk about, Celeste she's walking around this parade and Kevin Bacon's there with his wife who's now finally come back, and she looks at Kevin and they just kind of stare at each other, and then she just knows my husband's dead. And then she goes over and looks across the street, and Laura Linney's standing there with all these guys, the Savage Brothers, and they just stare at each other, and Laura Linney just stares straight through her, like basically letting her know, you're the reason all this happened because you didn't trust your husband, and so now my husband killed him, and you know what? I'm not effing sorry.
Right.
We're royalty over here, and now you're just going to have to deal with that. And then then right after that, she just starts calling to her son, like, I've accepted this new life that just happened. And I looked at the police officer, and he's and with his eyes, just like, yeah, there's nothing's going to come of this.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Yeah, it was just insane. Laura Linney's character just took like a 180 for me, basic wife role. And then just Laura Linney goes off in that dialogue at the end. And I'm like, she's psychopathic. Holy crap. Like, where the heck did that come from?
And she's like, basically, Jimmy, like, have sex with me and let's go to this parade.
It's so nuts.
Well, and then the other thing, which I think you're going to get to, but the part I loved at the very end too is Kevin Bacon and Jimmy lock eyes.
Yeah.
And he gives him the finger gun, which, I mean, I can only take as like, basically it's like, I know what you're now becoming. I'm on the other side of this. I'm coming after you.
Yeah.
And Sean Penn, like, just solidifying the fact that he's now back in the life. He's going to run this place. He's going to run this town like Laura Linney wants. He's going to be the boss of the Savage Brothers again, just shrugs and like, basically, come after me. But
yeah,
like, this is who I am.
Yeah, it's like this ending opened up, I felt like kind of a bigger world at that moment. Like, there's obviously not a Mystic River 2. I don't know. Is there a Mystic River 2?
There is not, which I do want to talk about.
So there's not a Mystic River 2. But yeah, so Sean is like, I'm going to get you. And Jimmy's like, come at me, bro. And I felt like, damn, that just opened up like a much bigger world where I felt like it's this cat and mouse. I'm imagining the sequel or this like turns in like spin-off TV show where Jimmy is like doing all these like horrible crimes in Boston and Sean just like tries to get him. It just opened up so much possibility.
This is like exactly what I want to talk about is I think it opens up such a possibility for like more. It's like, it makes you pine for like, how does this end? Because the ending just opens up a whole nother story. And yet that sequel would have probably been horrible. And everyone would have thought, oh, they're just going after money. Why do they have to do sequels of things? Because I think this movie is honestly perfectly done.
Yeah.
but at the same time, it still makes you want more. Like, what happens to these characters? Because the character development of Jimmy going back into this world, and now just you're like the holy shit realization you have at the end, where you're just like, this guy is now gonna, like, as his wife says, you're gonna run this town. It's just kind of mind blowing. And that last little finger gun and shrug, it's just like, it leaves you wanting more. And I'm glad they had the forethought to say, we're not, that's it. This is where it ends.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is a really good movie. All by itself. If they made a sequel, it would have been ruined. But I guess that's just an example of good writing. Is it leaves you, it ends the story, but it leaves you wanting more.
In wrapping up, would you watch this movie again?
It's a hard movie. You don't really see anything too graphic, but it's a very sad movie. It's a depressing movie. I think I'll have to be in a really, really the right mood for this one again. I think it was very enjoyable. It was very well done, but it'll be a while. It'll be a while. Thanks for listening to another episode of I Finally Watched, where I finally watched Mystic River.
We'll see you next time.